Aristotle struggled with this issue. Again, it's been an issue for thousands of years. Where does life come from? Where does each individual organism come from? Because it's amazing, isn't it? Isn't it amazing that some maggot develops into an amazingly complex fly, and the next maggot goes into an amazingly complex fly, and a really ugly, human being while in the womb grows up into this amazingly complex, beautiful human being as an adult. Every time. How does that work? He struggled with this. How does something that looks kind of like ugh, grow into something beautiful? How does a caterpillar change into a butterfly? How does this work and happen every single time, generation after generation after generation? Where does life come from? Where does each individual life come from? Aristotle suggested that simple things, the maggots, actually came from non-living things, and that happens all the time. See, that gets rid of the problem. You just say, it's not that complicated. It's really simple. Simple things just simply come from non-living things all the time. The truth is that God created life. God creates life. God is life. He's the source of life. There is no source of life aside from him. That's what the Bible's been telling us. Well, spontaneous generation theory, that's Aristotle's theory, that simple organisms come from non-living things, held sway for 2,000 years. But beginning in the 17th century and for 200 years thereafter, scientists gradually set that theory aside, realizing that organism after organism actually came from another organism. That maggots actually came from flies laying eggs that grew up into maggots, that grew up into flies. That rats actually came from other rats, and so on and so forth. That life actually comes from life. But if you are an evolutionist believing that there was once a time when there was no life, then where did the first life come from? If the chicken comes from the egg, which comes from the chicken, which comes from the egg, which comes from the chicken, which comes from the egg, where'd the first one come from? And if it came from a non-chicken, which was another living thing, and so on, where did it all come from? If it all comes from a bacterium, where did the first bacterium come from? Where did the first life come from? In the 1920s, it was suggested that it must be that life comes from non-life. This is Aristotle's idea of spontaneous generation. Evolution has to say it happened at least once, even though all of our evidence indicates that life only comes from life. So abiogenesis theory came about. Life arose from non-life, and this 1920s idea spawned an idea in an experimentalist's head. How about if we test this out? If in fact there was a time when life came from non-life, and that was easy, then we ought to be able to reproduce the conditions of the early earth, and we should be able to spontaneously produce or watch life spontaneously generate from it. This came up with the famous Urey Miller experiments, and those were exciting. It's pretty cool. They put together their guess as to what the early atmosphere was like. It wasn't a very good guess, but later guesses would be a little bit closer, perhaps, and put a little energy into it, and it turns out we can use all sorts of different kinds of energy, and lo and behold, you get amino acids out of it. Cool. There's 20 amino acids that are used in biological organisms most commonly, and most of those amino acids can be generated in this fashion. That's very encouraging. It seems to, it suggests that maybe life did come in this manner. In fact, not only do you get amino acids, but the three most common amino acids in organisms are the three most common amino acids you get in these experiments. In fact, the most common amino acid in biological organisms is the most common amino acid that comes out of these experiments. And the second is the second, and the third is the third. That's cool. Not only that, But we've got meteorites coming in from space, and we've detected amino acids on those meteorites in those same ratios. And we see those ratios in interstellar clouds. Whoa, that sounds like pretty good evidence that, in fact, life came from non-life spontaneously, right? Well, there are some problems with those experiments. They never actually produce life. They produce what we call monomers, which are small organic molecules that are used to build the big organic molecules of which life is made, but they've never been able to produce life. In fact, they've never been able to produce the large molecules, only the small ones, only things like amino acids and that sort of thing. And in fact, the fact that the most common amino acids formed in these experiments are the most common ones in biology suggests to me that God made the most common amino acid the easiest one to make. And the second most common amino acid in organisms was the second easiest amino acid to make. So actually it's an example of good design, not that life came from the non-living. These experiments have been done over and over and over again for decades and decades, and never have they produced life. They haven't produced, in fact, it goes better than that. Let's take an organism that already is alive and let it die. Now you got the whole complexity there. All you got to do is make it alive again. Nobody's been able to do that. Scientists haven't even been able to resuscitate a truly dead organism. Not only can they not produce an organism from non-living material, but they can't even resuscitate one. So what is life? In fact, it could be that life isn't a physical thing that you can produce in an experiment. Perhaps life is created by God and introduced by God